Hello, hello. Welcome to Advanced Air Roll Tips. You might be coming here after having watched my other video, How I Finally Understood Constant Air Roll, but if you have not seen it or are a beginner to air roll in general, this video is somewhat of a continuation of that one, so I recommend watching it first. Back then, I was just a wee Diamond 1-ish player who had just gotten started learning air roll. Now, over 2 years later, I'm sitting somewhere around low Champ 3. In that time, I've improved various aspects of my play, especially air roll, but I'm still nowhere near as proficient as I want to be. I tell you this to try to comfort you with the knowledge that if you've been practicing for a long time and are still struggling, that's okay. That's normal. This game is incredibly challenging to learn, especially air roll.
Oof.
So let's get started with some advanced tips for improving your air roll. Real quick, let's talk keybinds. One thing I've learned to be good at aerials is that you need to be able to perform 3 specific actions at the same time with full dexterity. This means individual fingers for each button you'll have assigned. These actions are jump, directional air roll, and boost. I used to have jump and boost both handled by my thumb, but that made it significantly more difficult to choose when to boost when jumping, leaving me unable to do much of anything besides zero boost and full boost jumps. Right now, my bindings for these actions are jump on A, boost on R1, and air roll right on L2. You might be wondering about the decision to put air roll on L2. You see, you'll never need to reverse an air roll at the same time, so it's a free action slot. However, yes, it does take some time to learn how to half flip again. Also, you might be asking yourself, how are you hitting all of these buttons? Well, I actually play with my index fingers on L and R1 and my middle fingers on L and R2. I know this is not the norm, but it gives me so much more freedom to take actions independent of one another. And by the way, all of my examples will be for air roll right, as that is what I use. You'll need to flip everything if you're using air roll left. But hopefully, I'll explain things well enough that it just makes sense, regardless of direction. You might be thinking to yourself, I understand the concept of air roll, and I can make simple adjustments, but I really struggle with making major turns. If that's you, let me introduce you to what I call rolling adjustments. If you've watched my first video, you understand how the direction you push your joystick directs the nose of your car in that direction, as seen from the nose of your car. So, for demonstration purposes, let's say our nose is facing the ceiling and we need to make a sharp turn downward. This may seem extreme and simple, but trust me, this is just a minimum complexity example. Now, the obvious thing to do would be to wait until you see the hood of your car facing you, and then press up. Note that, of course, as you get better, you don't need to wait, and you can just press the appropriate direction given the orientation of your car at any time, but we're keeping it simple. Anyway, let's try that out. You'll notice this doesn't have quite the effect we wanted to achieve. Yes, we started tilting forward, but we had to stop pressing up almost immediately to avoid over-adjusting to the left. So how do we make this more fluid? There has to be a way to continue the motion. Well, for now let's switch gears and consider how we would make our car move in the same direction, but when it is nose up and facing to the left. This might seem like a leap, but just go with me. In this position, clearly we must press right. What about when the hood is facing away? Yes, of course, we press down. And when facing right, clearly we must press left. Did you notice what we just did? We checked all 4 steps of 90 degrees of the total rotation of the car when rotating with air roll right. And what did we find? Our joystick directions also went around a full rotation. If you look at them in the order we just tested, you'll see that they went in the same clock direction as our air roll, clockwise. So what does this mean? Well, we can naturally fill in the gaps between the steps and realize, to continue adjusting in a particular direction, you need to roll your joystick in your air roll direction for the duration of your adjustment. Let's take a look at what that looks like when applied to our example of going from nose pointing at the ceiling to pointing at the ground. Well, would you look at that? one fluid motion. Keep in mind this can be applied to any directional change you need to do. Hopefully this is something you will now be able to actively think about when practicing, but you'll notice that this also starts to come naturally as you get more comfortable with air roll. Now on to the next tip. Once you've become relatively comfortable with rolling adjustments, there's little left that you can specifically learn regarding air roll in rings maps, besides just grinding out the skill. So let's move on to what at least close to everyone watching this is learning air roll for: aerial ball control. Not only is this an extremely satisfying skill to have, it will also inadvertently improve your air roll. How is this possible? Well, you need to be magnitudes more precise with your movements than in rings maps. You don't have the luxury of making adjustments based on the speed of your flight. Now, you also need to consider the ball. However, there's too much to learn about aerial ball control for me to cover here, so I'll just be covering some initial tips. To start practicing this, the first thing I recommend is using a training pack that sets the ball up for you. I'll put the code for this one in the description. The reason for this is that similar to isolation workouts in the gym for strengthening specific muscles, it's best to learn skills in isolation until you become relatively proficient. I also will not be going into the basics of how to set up air dribbles and where to hit the ball on the wall. There are plenty of other tutorials for that. I'll be focusing on the in-air control. Now, if this is early on in your aerial ball control learning process, you will immediately notice that you're struggling to do anything. How could this be? You hardly have any problems in rings maps after all. To explain that, let me go on a bit of a tangent here. The fact of the matter is, in rings, you had the luxury of just watching your car as you fly, but now you also need to watch the ball, and cannot use visual cues of your car to easily perform micro-adjustment corrections. Ball control training is about watching the ball. To clarify, training works in 3 layers. Rings maps were the car, or you. In-game will be the opponents, but right now, we're on the ball. Each layer requires proficiency in the layer before it. This is actually an important lesson that extends to any other skill in this game. You might be good in practice, but since your focus in-game is not on yourself or the ball, all skills will be harder to execute. That's why so many high-level players recommend playing ones. It's so you have more time on the ball to practice that 3rd layer of learning a skill. Now that we understand that, let's go back to aerial ball control. The other thing you'll notice is that the camera becomes really difficult to play with. You might be tempted to turn off ball cam, but that would be a huge mistake. Often this results from not matching the speed of the ball correctly. While that is also very important to improve on, it is worthwhile to try to complete these air dribbles anyway, as in-game you are bound to end up in this kind of scenario regardless of your ball speed matching ability. This is something you're just going to have to learn and get used to, and air dribbles are a good way to do that. There are some workshop maps that get you in bad camera scenarios even more often, but those are a bit too advanced for this video. Though I will link some in the description for those who are curious. Okay, so we're struggling. Now what? Unfortunately, here I have to be honest. This is something you just need to do over and over again. There are no tricks. However, I can help you prioritize what you should be thinking about on every attempt. Like I said, watch the ball. You can, of course, check your car if you really need to, but your focus should be watching the ball and the contact point you're aiming for. Focus on pointing your nose at the ball. Nose touches go in the direction your nose is pointed, which, coincidentally, is also the direction your boost will push you, keeping you in line with the ball. Purposely using other parts of your car is something you will work up to give you better control in specific circumstances. If you want to focus practicing just this tip, you may want to play in slow motion so you can watch your car in addition to the ball. Or play in regular speed and just only watch your car and keep the ball in your peripheral vision until you feel comfortable. Of course, following point 1, this is not a habit you should get into. Control your boosting. You need to catch up to the ball to dribble it, but approach too quickly and you risk knocking it out of your reach. One way to mitigate this is to pay attention to your boost as you make contact. To keep the ball close, stop boosting at that moment. Conversely, if you need the ball to speed up, boost through your contact. In line with this, do not just tap boost absent-mindedly. You only want to boost when you're facing the direction you want to go, which is mainly just when you're facing the ball. For a regular off-the-wall air dribble, you will want to make contact with the ball from below the horizontal middle of the ball at the start of your air dribble to gain height. If your first touch is above the horizontal middle, you will end up just playing catch-up with the ball and not have much control because of it. This is because you're chasing not just the speed you gave the ball, but gravity as well. If your first touch pushes the ball up, then you have gravity helping slow the ball down for you to catch up to again easily. To recap, watch the ball, point your nose at the ball, control your boost as you make contact with the ball, try to boost only when facing the direction you are trying to go, and your first touch should push the ball up. I could go on with more specifics, but that's out of the scope for this video. If you want to see anything like that, let me know in the comments. For now, let's move on to the final tip. You should now know how to air roll relatively well and have at least a semblance of an idea of how to air roll air dribble. Yet, grinding air dribbles all day becomes monotonous, and you need some variety in your training so that you're thrust into more uncomfortable situations more frequently. This is where I suggest that you begin to dabble in other advanced mechanics that have only now become feasible since you understand air roll well. For example, flip resets are a great one, as it teaches you positioning relative to the ball and precision in your aerial movements. Another is double taps. I love double taps. They are incredibly useful in game, especially when you have low boost. Practicing these teaches you how to angle your car to hit the ball accurately and how to read rebounds quickly and effectively. And that's it. That's all I can really share without getting too into the weeds, which I am reserving for potential follow-up videos. I already have some ideas, but if you have any specific requests, please let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to see those when they come out. And finally, please leave a like if you found this video helpful.